War in Congo, the South African Army in difficulty. The Rainbow Nation deploys 2,900 soldiers in the North Kivu region, east of the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is under attack from M23 rebels. But as South Africa seeks to become a major military player on the African continent, the South African Army faces logistical problem. The death of 2 South African soldiers in the DRC last week, killed by a mortar attack launched by the M23 rebels, has created controversy in South Africa. A few days before this dramatic episode, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa announced that he was sending 2,900 soldiers to the DRC and wanted to strengthen the military contingent of the Southern African Development Community, SAG, present there, a €100 million operation financed by state coffers. The announcement fueled criticism from several opposition parties as South Africa is plagued by unemployment and great inequalities. In a statement, the Democratic Alliance, the main opposition party, castigated a reckless and irrational decision and stressed that many military vehicles, including Atlas Oryx helicopters, are broken down. The South African Army therefore finds itself with little air support, an essential element for fighting in unfamiliar and complex terrain like North Kivu, as explained by Lindy Heineken, professor of military sociology at the University of Stellenbosch. The South African land forces are quite competent at carrying out operations, but without air or logistical support, they are very limited. Lack of mean. Several other South African military missions are underway. 1,000 soldiers are deployed in Mozambique to face the jihadists of Cabo Delgado. 3,000 others mobilized in support of the South African police to fight against gangs of illegal miners. Costly operations which are shaking the budget of the Ministry of Defence already cut. Parliament allocated €2 billion for 2024, 450 million less than the previous year. A symptom of these financial difficulties, the major annual military parade, which takes place every February 21 to honour South African soldiers, did not take place this year. South Africa's 36,000 soldiers have to deal with vehicles and technologies, most of which date from the border war against Angola, 1966, 1988, 40 years ago. This equipment is therefore more prone to malfunctions. Posts on social media showed a South African armoured vehicle, a Mamba, breaking down on muddy roads in the Congolese town of Sake, forcing soldiers to push it to their base. The army has not been able to restructure itself over the last 30 years, and this is one of its major problems. Lindy Heineken, professor of military sociology at the University of Stellenbosch, the army has not been able to restructure itself over the last 30 years, and this is one of its major problems, explains Lindy Heineken. It makes it much less flexible. The army is also facing a loss of skills with the retirement of its experienced instructors who fought against Angola and Cuban forces in the South African border war. When contacted, the South African Army did not respond to our request for an interview. In an interview with Eyewitness News, Sifiwe Dlamini, spokesperson for the Ministry of Defence, said the Ministry is busy developing and implementing projects to resolve the issues affecting the army. The mission in North Kivu is complicated by the lack of trust between the foreign forces deployed in the DRC, DEA and MONUSCO, and the Congolese army FARDC, some soldiers of which are suspected of fighting at night in secret for the rebels of the M23. For me, it's a mission impossible, breathes Lindy Heineken. According to her, these South African soldiers deployed without a defined strategy, with a lack of preparation and a faulty logistical organization, are an explosive cocktail which risks leading to conflicts with the local population and human rights violation. A country committed to an authoritarian path? Part of the South African population would prefer to recall soldiers to South Africa to avoid these additional expenses and to better counter crime and control the country's borders. A risk for the stability of the Rainbow Nation, according to the sociologist. The more soldiers we introduce into the social and political fabric of the country, the more we militarize our society, which could gradually turn into a recipe for authoritarian government. During apartheid, the army was widely used to maintain order and as a counterinsurgency force opposing liberation movements. She was thus involved in numerous regime massacres. With the advent of democracy in 1994, the government of Nelson Mandela therefore decided to reform its functioning so that it no longer intervened in internal affairs and resumed the role of a conventional army. An important decision on which governments have gradually returned in recent years, starting with the presidency of Jacob Zuma. Today, it is regularly called upon to protect coal-fired power plants or to support the police. On May 29, South Africans will be called to the polls to elect their president. A high-risk election for Nelson Mandela's party, the ANC, in power since 1994, which could lose its absolute majority for the first time. Some fear social uprisings.